Hi, welcome to this Sea Ranch Life. I'm George Callis, your host. Today, we're going to be hearing from two proponents of Measure E, which appears on this November 8th ballot. Measure E is a bond measure that would fund maintenance, new facilities, and housing for the Horicon School District. Our guests are Billy Riggs, who's a board member of the Horicon School District, and Menka Sethi, who's leading the facilities committee. Let's learn about Measure E.
Hi there. Today we've got two guests that are going to tell us a little bit about Measure E. What you're going to hear about Measure E is on this November's ballot and will help with work at Horicon School, which is our local elementary school. It's a one school district, the only school in the district. And today we have with us Billy Riggs. And thanks, Billy. Good to have you. Billy is a city planner, an urban planner, I think would be fair. And I understand, Billy, you are also a professor at USF, University of San Francisco.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, and the only thing I don't see on your bio here is a Nobel Prize. So we can, if we have time, we'll talk about that later. Also with us today is Menka, I'm sorry, pronounce your last name for me. Menka Sethi.
That's exactly right. Yeah, well done.
That is okay. That is correct. And Menka is Menka works with a company called Juno and does what sounds to me like a lot of high-powered marketing and thinking and strategizing and everything. She might tell us a little bit about this. I've asked both Billy and Menka to join us today because they've been very involved in Measure E. Billy sits on the board of the Horicon School District. Menka has been leading a facilities committee to look at the facilities and to help figure out what they need to do in the future. So Billy and Menka, welcome. Thanks for joining us here.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, Billy, why don't you tell us a little bit about Measure E, maybe how it came up and what's included at it? What are voters being asked to think about?
Yeah, that's a good way to start is really to start at kind of the history of how our community has supported education, and education, I think, for a unique population. It's surprisingly, largely a lot of our local, makes up a lot of our workforce and children of our workforce. And we approved a bond in 1996 for the school, and that bond helped us rebuild the school and made it seismically safe. And what happened is we paid off that bond, and after 20 years, and we saved the taxpayers some money in doing so. We refinanced a couple times, and now we have more facilities needs. We have leaky roofs. We have some additional seismic issues. We have some unsafe facilities, a number of ADA issues that need to be addressed, as well as some life safety, fire protection type issues as well.
Explain for some of our viewers who aren't familiar with ADA, just a quick explanation of that.
So yeah, I mean, the Americans with Disabilities Act requires us to have facilities that for people of all needs, and so that's our goal is to have a facility that meets the needs of anyone that would be able to access our school. And as a public facility, we're required to meet certain accessibility standards for those with handicap.
And providing accessibility in our buildings, especially.
That's right.
It means we have to change things in our building and make changes so that they're fully accessible.
That's right. And as people, we have a lot of people in the design community and the Sea Ranch community, and we know that our energy standards have changed. We've done a great job of kind of bootstrapping energy efficiency and water efficiency, but we do know that we want to go above and beyond and actually meet aggressive energy standards to go towards taking the school off the grid if we can. So I think there's a number of things that we want to pursue as a school to actually that kind of align us with the sustainability values, but also contribute back to our local resilience. One people don't know about the school is we actually have for North Coast Fire Protection District, we actually house a fire engine there, and we actually have a water tank that actually supports the district.
Wow,
So we actually offer.
That fire engine must be popular at recess time, huh?
Oh yeah. But it's a big important. I think it's important for a Horicon community to see the Horicon School as a community asset, and that's what the board looks at it. And I think the way Menka has really spent a lot of time thinking about our local workforce and how we provide housing and shelter for them. And that's another thing we're starting to think about, is taking just a small chunk of the housing needs and trying to address that for our local people.
Billy, tell me, how much money are you all asking the voters to approve? And how does it pay it off? You're basically, a bond is a form of a loan in a way.
Right.
So how much money are you trying to get, and how are you going to pay it off?
Well, in California, the simplest way we have to finance public good infrastructure, and the great things that we want to do for our schools is through a general obligation bond. And so we're asking for $10.4 million from voters, and clearly we don't ask them for that up front, right? The idea is we go out and we secure this loan, and over a 20-year period, we actually work towards paying that back, and we work with voters, or we work with the voters who pay a certain percentage of property taxes every year, and that's I believe $30 on every $100,000 of assessed value. And keep in mind that is assessed value. It's not like, what is your house worth? And we get a lot of questions about that. Yeah,
it's not market value; it's assessed value. There's a difference.
Right.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And so it's a lot more modest, I think, than people realize. When they think about the price escalation we've seen recently, particularly in the Sea Ranch community. But that's the critical way where we're able, all kinds of, local infrastructure at the most basic level. That's how we can do it for cities and counties in California.
Yeah. Menka, talk a little bit about this facilities committee, and you're chairing that, I understand. What did you do when you jumped in on this? How did you start? Did you crawl around the school and climb up the roof? And perhaps you talked to architects and engineers and facilities managers and various people. And I'm sure you heard from faculty and your principal about things that they knew were necessary. How did you figure out what needed to be done?
Exactly right. We reached out to an architecture firm, Alameda Architecture, that worked specifically with school districts. And they went through every portion of the facility to identify any need that needed to be addressed, whether it's resurfacing the parking lot, adding stormwater bioswales, new fencing, looking at the solar capacity, playground safety, and went and produce cost estimates for each line item that was identified as a need. So they both identified the needs, they prepared a budget behind it, and then they baked into those budget needs escalation, because if we're looking at 20 or 30-year horizon of build out, costs escalate. So they pieced all of that together for us, and we reviewed it with faculty, staff, and the board, and so that we have a plan in place for how to spend the funds.
Now, my understanding is the projects that you have identified that need to happen with these buildings and on this campus, that there's a list of those projects, and this measure and the bonds that fund it and everything, those projects are the only thing you can spend the money on. Is that correct? You can't change the projects now if this passes.
That's accurate, yes. And their bond requires the establishment also of a citizens oversight committee that audits the expenditures annually to make sure that the funds are only spent on projects approved by voters.
Right. So voters
and moreover, George, also, if we don't spend the funds, the debt is an issue, right? So if we decided that, one component, we got a grant to do something, then that just takes, we don't actually have to spend the money. So then the debt doesn't go to the taxpayer.
Correct. So the district only sells bonds as they need it for each phase of the work. And if you find some other way to fund something, then great, then that's money saved. If it happens to work out that way. So really, the voters can sort of think of this like a homeowner thinks of his mortgage. You get a loan, and you typically pay it back in 30 years, and sometimes you can get better interest rates, so you go refinance your house. School districts can do the very same thing, obviously, and interest rates, although they're higher right now, they go. We've watched them for the last few years go up and come down, and a lot of folks refinance their homes. A lot of institutions like school districts refinance their bonds because they were able to get more favorable rates, and you were able to do that with the bond issue back in the 90s. And
that's
Billy,
totally right. Yeah.
yeah, Billy, you mentioned to me before we got started that by refinancing and retiring the bonds earlier, that you were able to save a lot of money.
Yeah, it's quite a substantial amount, and I think it's around $3 million of the total life cycle of the loan. But if they're listeners, they're really interested in what we were able to save the taxpayers, we can get that number for you.
Yeah.
It's like one of those things that's lodged deep in my brain that I don't recall the precise.
Yeah, no, that's okay. But that's money that didn't have to be paid back because
it's real money. Yeah.
You were frugal, and you were paying attention, and you got the work done, or you paid off the bonds early, you got them refinanced. That all results in savings for the district, which translates ultimately into savings for the taxpayers. Let's Menka, talk a little bit more. There's a list of the projects you want to do, and where does that live? And if the voting audience out there says, well, what are these people planning to do with our school? Where would we find that list? And yeah, tell us a little bit about that.
There's a list in the voter ballot itself, which the voters literally are voting on. In addition, we're happy to preview the facilities needs assessment in detail, and it goes through every portion of the campus and identifies every line item. And we have the cost breakout, we have the escalation breakout. I think the total for the non-housing uses comes to about $6.5 million, and we have every line item broken out. So happy to share. And stop. Yeah. George, we can pull that up on the screen if you want me to.
No, we don't have to do that right now. I would.
Yeah, I think it goes down to like different types of gaskets. The level of resolution, I think, was a little overkill. But I think one thing that did for us is it gave us a pretty good estimate, at least on the components that we need. And if Menka and I had one risk, we remain really concerned about price escalation, the cost of labor, and the cost. And we were both in planning and design industries, and Menka, her company does mass timber, and they're doing big buildings. And so when we think about like price escalation in the construction trades right now, I think we think this is a conservative number, but we also think it will be within the realm of the doable. Based on what we've estimated in terms of escalation over the next couple of years.
Let's explain a little bit. We've used that word escalation, which is a very common term used in the design and construction world. Another way to think of it for our viewers, tell me if you agree, we're all acutely aware of inflation here over the last few months. Most of us have noticed it at the gas pump. We've all noticed it at the grocery store, and we've noticed it if you've done any projects around your house. Materials cost a lot more than they did even a few months ago. So would it be correct for a viewer to say, oh, it's like inflation, things go up? We hope that they don't go crazy, but in your planning, and as you develop cost estimates, you said, okay, we're going to make some conservative estimates about how this escalation is going to occur, and we're going to build that in to our costs so that we're not caught unaware, so that we don't say, okay, this is going to cost $10,000, but a year from now it's not going to cost $10,000. It's most likely going to be more. Sometimes in the world things do go back to lower cost, but you can't count on it. So you have embedded in this what the average person would call inflationary costs, but we refer to them as escalation. on
That's
that.
exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, and when we think about inflation, George, it's like it's based on the consumer price index, and those are usually consumer goods. So that's
Right.
like your gallon of milk and stuff like that. And I think
Right.
it's important to understand for listeners to understand and viewers to understand that a lot of the stuff we build with, where there's a lot of labor and there's the trades involved, and where there's a shortage of timber and there's issues with steel, we do have different price pressures. And
Right.
that can drive inflation
Right.
or escalation higher.
Yeah, yeah. And that data is actually all tracked by organizations within the design and construction field. So there are people, not just a couple of people here at Horicon School, there are people that are nationally and internationally tracking the price of plywood, concrete, steel, and making the best projections they can about how much that's, and they're likewise they're tracking labor costs.
Absolutely.
And attempting to make the best projections they can so that you all can use that information in developing a budget for this bond issue. Hey, Menka, let's talk a little bit about this bond issue has to me, a really fascinating piece to it, and it's the housing component of it. Most of us, I think, are aware of the acute housing shortage, not only here on the coast, but throughout California, really, and really in a lot of places in the country. There's a housing shortage, and housing costs, as we all know, are higher than the national average in California, and particularly in our little corner of California. What has that meant to a school district? Number one, why is housing an issue? Why are you even bothering to think about housing? Generally, school districts build school buildings and teach kids. Why are you dipping your toe in housing?
It's a great question. As part of our facilities needs assessment, we had heard stories of the housing conditions of the teachers. We had heard, we've seen the attraction and retention issues that Horicon has faced in terms of recruiting teachers, keeping classrooms fully staffed. It's been an ongoing challenge. So we took the time to survey the entire teacher and staff population at Horicon to really dig into affordability issues, housing standards. And what we found were teachers, staff members who are educating our most precious assets, our children. Some were commuting in over an hour, had no heat, incredible conditions. So the thought was, and there's only a handful of other school districts around the state that have used general obligation bonds to build teacher housing. It's fairly recent because of the housing pressures, especially in rural coastal areas where it's very difficult to build housing. So we decided to embark on our own path of exploring how our bond funds could potentially help. So of the $10.4 million that we're asking voters to approve, about 6.5 of those would be used for facilities needs. And we're looking at whatever is left after the inflation that we talked about, be put towards staff and teacher housing. And we see it as twofold. One, it's helping Horicon attract and retain teachers. And two, it's helping Horicon do its part in addressing the regional housing shortage, that we see play out. And
it's also, Menka said incredible conditions. And I think we should make sure the listeners understand that the conditions that some of our staff and teachers were describing were, I think she said, no indoor plumbing. This is conditions that a working professional, particularly part of our workforce, shouldn't have to deal with. It's definitely not Western nor modern standards. So I think I just wanted to add that. And Mike, I don't know if you had anything else to add in terms of kind of synergies or anything. Sorry.
Will you attempt to? Are you going to assist faculty and staff financially, or are you going to acquire housing, or build housing, or actually rent housing that can then you can allow faculty and staff to? How are you going to do that?
So the plan is to either acquire housing or build housing. And the way for doing that, the key part of that is the school district would be able to offer that housing to teachers and staff
Right.
at more affordable rates, so they don't spend more than 30% of their income towards
Right.
housing costs. And part of our surveying of the teacher and student population, there are some portion of the population paying upwards of 50% of their income towards housing costs, and that is considered housing cost burdened. Anything more than 30% of income
Yeah.
is really unaffordable.
Yeah, that's correct. 30% is sort of the number that we all, that anyone would aim for, and spending 50% of your income is just not sustainable.
And we should add, that there's nothing that would preclude, although, all these funds would go to our teachers, and all this dedicated funds towards teacher housing would be dedicated to our local teaching workforce.
Right.
But there would be nothing that would preclude us, and we have had some early conversations with other critical members of our workforce at the Sea Ranch Association, at the Lodge, at RCMS.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing that would preclude a more expansive project or a more expansive and maybe ambitious plan. But right now, this is really just trying to take a small bite out of what is a big systemic challenge.
Yeah, yeah. So you're taking a step, and it's like you mentioned, Menka. This is fairly unusual for a school district to dive into tackling that housing issues. So I applaud you on that. Hey, let's give our folks a little more information. So this is Measure E. And the district is asking the voters to approve $10.4 million. Is that correct?
Yes.
And let's remind everybody of when voting day is.
It is Tuesday.
November 8th.
Tuesday,
Yes.
November 8th, right. And I think most of our voters, if not all of our voters in California, can vote by mail.
Yep.
Going there in person is perfectly fine too. And what's the way you're asking voters to vote on this?
Yes.
There we go. Yeah. A big yes. A big yes. That's what we're
Yeah, I mean, we would really appreciate and the continued support from our community. And I think that's said with the utmost respect and gratefulness. I mean, the board is so grateful for the support in the past and the continued investment from our community. And so I think we're saying thank you, but also if we can continue that longstanding investment, we'd be grateful.
Yeah. Yeah. This is about our schools and our kids and their education, and what could be more important than that? I can't think of anything. We've been speaking with Billy Riggs and Menka Sethi. Billy's on the board of the Horicon School District. Menka has been chairing the facilities committee, and together, along with other folks, they've been working on Measure E, which is on your ballots this November 8th, or find it by your mail-in ballot. And they and the school district and the board are asking that you vote yes on Measure E, because it will fund a lot of needed maintenance and facilities projects. And they're also going to look at housing issues and providing housing for teachers and staff at Horicon School District. Horicon, Billy, tell me again, how many students total are there at Horicon?
Yeah, there are 54 students.
54.
Yeah.
54. And Menka, how many faculty and administrators do we have, or faculty and staff, I should say?
18.
18. Okay. So we've got this over 70, 75 individuals here that are served. Some of them are teachers, and a lot of them are students, and they all live in this area, from Annapolis to Sea Ranch and various places. I do want to thank the both of you for taking a little time to explain to folks Measure E. Like I said, voters, get out there. I'm pretty sure that if you would like to talk to a board member of Horicon School, I'm sure anyone would be happy to talk to you about this. Menka, you'd be happy to talk to anyone. Look up their information. I found, can you go to the Horicon school website?
Yeah, so we're at horiconsd.org, and that's HORICON. SD.org, and a lot of the information on the bond is there. My email is also there along with the rest of the board members.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, thanks both for your time.
Thank you,
And
George.
we appreciate it. And we're all pulling for you at Measure E.
Thank you so much.
Really grateful. Thank you.